Guyana, and welcome to The Public Interest. I am Gomati Gangadin. Thank you for joining us. This morning, as usual, we have with us His Excellency President David Granger, President of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Gomati.
We also have two local journalists with us. They are Ms. Fareeza Haniff from the Guyana Chronicle and Mr. Jomo Paul from Demerara Waves. Today we are discussing local government and its importance to Guyana. Question, Mr. President, you have been on the picketing lines right outside of this complex a year ago, picketing for local government elections to be held in Guyana. Sir, it's only about 8 months into your administration, and already we are having local government elections. What is the feeling like?
Well, it feels good because we committed ourselves to local government elections. We worked in the 10th Parliament, both the APNU and AFC, and we feel it is not something ornamental. We feel it's fundamental to democracy that people in all of the regions and neighborhoods and municipalities should run their own affairs. In addition to having local government elections, we're creating three new municipalities at Mabaruma, Bartica, and Letham. So this is not just a fulfillment of an election promise. This is a democratic imperative that people in this country should be able to run their own affairs. So I'm very happy about it. It's a commitment that we gave to the Guyanese people, and I'm glad that next month, March the 18th, we'll be fulfilling that responsibility.
Thank you, sir. I will now invite the other journalists to pose their questions on the said topic.
Mr. President, are you surprised by the lack of enthusiasm by the electorate as it relates to local government elections?
Were there lack of enthusiasm, I would be surprised, but on the contrary, I feel people are very encouraged and very energized. Many groups outside of political parties have come forward, and I do believe we are going to have a very exciting elections. What I do know is that APNU in particular has been campaigning for nearly 3 years. We launched our election campaign in 2013, and as Gomati pointed out earlier, we were actually picketing the former office of the president in 2014 in order to get the elections. So I don't share the view that there is no enthusiasm. What I can say is that a large part of the population never participated in elections before. So there may be ignorance, but it's not ignorance born out of apathy. It's probably ignorance born out of lack of information. And once people get the information, and I think closer to the day, you will see they'll be gathering momentum. When the rallies start and when the propaganda starts, you'll see a different tempo. We're accustomed to general and regional elections, but few people living actually participated in local government elections. So I would not share your view that there's a lack of enthusiasm. I think closer to the day, you'll see the excitement, you'll feel the excitement.
Mr. President, there are some qualms that from the small groups and independent persons that the bigger parties, the AP and AFC, and the PP should not contest these local government elections. What are your views on that?
Well, it's open. Anyone can contest. Individuals, small groups, big groups, parties can contest. And as far as the APNU and AFC are concerned, we have not discouraged individuals or small groups from competing. I know they're competing in areas which were traditionally regarded as, for want of a better word, strongholds of the larger parties. But these elections are different from the general and regional elections because they allow two systems to function. The PR system, which we're familiar with, proportional representation, but is also the first past the post system. It means that, Jomo Paul can run on his own strength, and if he wins, he gets into the council. So it does not discriminate against individuals or small groups. And because only persons within those constituencies or within those neighborhoods or within those municipalities can compete, it means that they wouldn't be affected by their influence in other regions or other neighborhoods. So it's a local election. All politics is local. And if you are strong in Campbellville or Anna Regina, you can win. So I think it's a very fair system. even though I am biased in favor of the proportional representation system, which we've had since 1964, you also have the first past the post system. There are pitfalls in first past the post system, and there are disadvantages in the PR system. But I believe by having two systems, individuals and small groups within their constituencies will have an advantage. So it's not a countrywide, nobody's trying to capture the whole country. You're trying to capture a constituency, which may just be in Georgetown or Anna Regina or New Amsterdam. It's a very fair system, actually.
So a follow-up, sir. The argument is that the APNEFC holds central government, so the APNEFC should not be a part of the local democratic organs.
I don't see why not. I think that the AFC and APNU contain human beings who are interested in representing a particular point of view within the councils, either at neighborhood or municipal level. And they shouldn't be discriminated against. Why should they be ruled out? You see, if it's a fair system, everybody should share in the fairness. Everybody should gain access. Why should they be ruled out simply because they form themselves into a party?
Bringing you back to the part of ignorance and the electorate as it relates to local government elections, are you satisfied with the efforts being done to educate the population on these elections, or do you think more needs to be done?
I would say that more needs to be done, Fareeza. Even though my own partnership, APNU, has been campaigning for nearly 3 years, since 2013, there's never enough information. And I would admit too that there's a literacy problem in some communities, and merely handing out leaflets is not going to solve the problem. You need multimedia approach. You need to use the social media. You need to use television. You need to use face-to-face contact. You need to have maybe street fairs and plays explaining how to vote and who to vote for, who can be a candidate, what local government elections are all about. It's never going to be enough. And as Gomati pointed out, we were campaigning, we were picketing the office of the president in 2014. This matter went through the National Assembly slowly, the review of bills, the calling for elections on the 1st of August 2014, all of these things happened in slow motion. And I don't think the government could be blamed for this lack of information. I don't think GCOM could be blamed for the lack of information. But individual contestants who want to participate should go house to house and say, look, do you want a better neighborhood? Do you want a better municipality? I am XYZ. I'd like you to vote for me. This is what my program is. I'm going to improve drainage. I'm going to reduce the presence of mosquitoes. I'm going to provide street lights. So I expect the political candidates also to be part of the information process. Government, yes. GCOM, yes. But the parties and the candidates themselves must share the responsibility for election campaign. Look how much the world is learning about Donald Trump, about Hillary Clinton, about Marco Rubio. You know, this is not the responsibility of Barack Obama to tell the world about Marco Rubio, but everybody knows about it because of the role of the media, your role.
Sir, to what extent do you believe the closure of the Wales estate, the failure of your administration to increase salaries by 20%, and to remove VAT will affect the APNEFC showing at these elections?
I don't think it will have any damaging impact. As you know, when the coalition got into government, we were given a huge bill to bail out Gaisuco. I think it was over $13 billion. So it was just a matter of time. APNU didn't invent the crisis in the sugar industry. We inherited it, and the decision had to be taken whether the factory could be repaired and maintained. And it's a factory problem. But the estate itself could very well continue in production, and the canes would be ground at high flood. But it is not worthwhile to repair or rehabilitate the factory at the present time. I do not think that the closure of the factory will have a severe impact. And the other important thing to note is that local government elections are localized. Maybe in that particular constituency, there will be an impact, but we are putting measures in place to ensure that canes continue to be produced and workers could be employed at IFLAT and other factories. So I don't expect that there's going to be a major fallout.
Sir, if I could bring you back to local government elections. One of the major political parties in the setup has been complaining that GCOM has not been doing enough to sensitize persons in their efforts to ensure that, the local government election system runs smoothly. Does your administration as government or as the APNU-AFC coalition, do you have any concerns that have been expressed by the PPP?
Like any other citizen, I read the concerns expressed by the PPP, but as I said, it's a shared responsibility between GCOM, the state, and the political parties. I admitted to Fareeza that more could be done in terms of information, but it is not exciting information how to vote. I remember there was a gentleman from USAID, Mr. Bradbury, who actually went through the country holding conferences and symposia about local government. And sometimes when you look at the attendance, there were 8 people in the audience. There's a whole, auditorium, and there are just 8 or 12 people. So you cannot legislate the responsiveness of the potential voters. Some of them just don't show up, they're not interested. But when the time comes, you're going to see the turnout. When they hear about the rallies and when they see their favorite candidates, you're going to hear about it. Then they'll start asking, well, how to vote? But I'm not going to blame anybody at this point in time. And as I said, it's a shared responsibility, and the political parties have to do their part. GCOM has to do its part. The state has to do its part. But the candidates themselves have to explain to groups of young people the significance of local government elections. So when something happens in their community, they shouldn't blame somebody else, because they have a responsibility to go out there and vote. And if you don't vote and somebody gets in there who you don't like, who are you going to blame? If you want to put in somebody you feel is going to do well for your community, you have to vote. So I don't agree with the argument that enough is not being done, and I think citizens must have that civic consciousness to want to find out more, because it is his or her household, community, or region which will be at stake.
Thank you. Journalists, you can now use the opportunity to pose questions outside of the topic.
Well, Jomo's already done that.
Bringing you back to Wales Estate, Mr. President. Some persons are for and some are against the closure. Some critics, however, believe that your government mishandled the announcement of the closure, and it could have been done in a much better way. Do you believe so?
The question of the closure of, the question of the state of Gaisuko has been in the public domain for several years because of the declining production, because of the problems with the factory at Skeldon, because of poor labor turnout, and because of high production costs and low international market prices for sugar. So there has been, over the last decade, a tremendous amount of information about the state of the sugar industry. When the APNU-AFC coalition got into office, we commissioned an inquiry. And the inquiry pointed to the fact that we would have to make some very serious decisions about the entire industry. And one of those was the fact that some factories were not repairable, not sustainable. And yes, a decision was taken to close Wales, and it is a decision which the cabinet is responsible for. And I think in the fullness of time, it will be shown that the money saved from attempting to keep a dysfunctional factory working is better spent in other areas, that is improving the field rather than the factory, the field work in the West Demerara estates.
But to answer the question, do you believe that your government mishandled the announcement of the closure of Wales Estate?
No, I don't believe the government mishandled it. I do believe that enough information was in the public domain, and the public ought to have been aware of the fact that serious decisions had to be implemented in the sugar industry. I do agree too that maybe in the event of another closure, and then in the unlikely event that another closure is contemplated, that people could be given longer notice. But in this particular case, it was a fact that the Wales factory was underperforming in a serious way.
A follow-up. Could you say why it is that your agriculture minister, or anyone from government rather, has not reached out to the sugar workers? The Guyana Chronicle spoke to some sugar workers, and they are very upset that they haven't met with anyone from government to explain what's going to happen, how many of them are going to be retained at IFLAT Estate.
I am aware that the Minister of Agriculture himself was present at a press conference here, which explained to the public the reasons for the closure of that particular factory. I am not aware that he did not go on the ground at Wales, but this is something that could be rectified. I would agree that the workers need to be engaged by a state official, face to face.
Right.
Sir, if I can take you back to the same sugar industry issue. You said it was a cabinet decision to close Wales and not a board decision by Gaisuko?
And not?
A Gaisuko board decision.
The cabinet has responsibility for those decisions.
So cabinet decided to close Gaisuko?
Cabinet has responsibility.
Is there any thoughts at the moment to privatize Gaisuko or any of the?
No. I would expect that the Commission of Inquiry in its totality will be taken to the National Assembly, and there should be a national consultation before decisions are taken about the whole industry. But what happened in the case of Wales was a specific dysfunction. But in terms of the whole industry, you cannot expect that the industry will be shut down or privatized without a public consultation.
Okay. On a separate issue, can you say if there has been any progress as it relates to fostering a better relationship with the opposition since your last meeting with Fareeza Haniff?
We have exchanged what I would call the lists of counterparts. I gave Mr. Jagdeo a list of our ministers. We have, as you know, 15 ministries in the coalition, and he gave me a list of his ministers. So there is a high level of correspondence between the two. For example, when we had problems with the Venezuelans, the foreign minister, Mr. Granger, was able to get advice and meeting with Ms. Gail Teixeira. And the other ministers are aware of their counterparts on the PPP side. When we are ready, we can have another meeting. There's no schedule of regular meetings, and I expect that we will have a meeting at least once a month. But I'll meet Mr. Jagdeo anytime. We don't have to wait for a crisis, but we know who the counterparts are.
Right. But recently we've seen that he's refused to allow any of his members to sit on state boards. How does this affect the work of the administration?
We'll have to ask him why he made that decision.
Right.
But in keeping with our own philosophy, we would like to ensure that our policies are discussed with the opposition prior to being announced. For example, in the case of the budget, the Minister of Finance did call in the opposition, and it doesn't mean that the opposition will change its stance, but we feel this is the way to go, a consensual, cooperative, collaborative way rather than a confrontational way. So we will continue to try, and I hope that the leader of the opposition would review his decision about participation in state boards. He asked for an assurance that the government side would not overrule the opposition side, but again, I don't think it's necessarily a strong argument. We need to move ahead, with the administration of the country, and state boards are an important part, and we will continue to invite them to participate. So I will meet him anytime, anywhere.
Mr. President, one of your major campaign promises was an increase for public servants and discipline services as a whole. But in Budget 26, we don't see any increases for the police and soldiers. Now, they're not unionized, so there's no reason for that they should not get an increase. Can you say, and then we hear the finance minister saying that the administration can't afford to give them an increase at this time. Can you give them the fish for that?
Well, as you know, one of the early steps we took concerned the efficiency of the public service. Professor Harold Lutchman is chairman of a board. We have not received the report of that commission of inquiry. The board or the commission of inquiry is looking at the salaries and conditions of service, SACOS, salaries and conditions of service of the public servants. Now, it is true that the public service is made up of different branches, and the defense force, police force, and the other discipline services are not necessarily parts of the traditional public service, but there is some equivalence. There's some equivalence, and once we get the report of that board, we'll be able to draw the equivalence between ranks in the police and defense forces with positions in the public service. So they are related, even though the Commission of Inquiry is not necessarily asked to rule on wages and salaries in the public service. We don't want to have any disproportionate allocations to one as opposed to the other. But we're all interested in having an efficient public service, and once we get that report, we'll be able to begin negotiations with the public service, and based on the outcome of those negotiations, the defense force and the police force can expect changes in the salary structures.
How soon do you expect this report from the Public Service Commission?
Well, I would expect that the report should be ready within the first half of this year.
So no increases for the first half of the year?
Well, once we get the report, again, you asked me a question. I don't know when the report will be handed in. Once it's handed in, we will work expeditiously to call in the unions, particularly the GPSU, conclude negotiations, and on the basis of that, implement the changes that are necessary. If it could be done within the first quarter, I'd be very happy. It's already February. The first quarter is just a matter of 6 or 7 weeks away.
But do you think the administration will be in a better financial position to afford these increases when the time comes?
We have planned for changes in the emoluments of public servants. So it is not as though we're not thinking ahead. We expect that there are going to be changes, and we have planned to have enough to pay the changes when they are announced.
Sir, you recently convened a committee to address the suicide increases that has been taken over the country. Sir, could you say what is the status of this committee and how often it has been meeting?
Well, I think the meetings are held at least fortnightly, and only yesterday I met an NGO. People are coming on board. Several NGOs have been involved, and my only concern now is that some of the data which have been generated are still anecdotal. We want scientific data so that we can have interventions which are guided to produce results. Right now we've had a variety of theories and notions and hunches. What we need is a more factual basis on which to plan our interventions. Some people believe access to insecticides or pesticides, so they provide these canisters. But if you want to kill yourself, and the chemicals are locked up, you go and jump over a bridge or hang yourself. So we're looking at having a commission which will give us the data, give us the facts, give us statistics, and take us away from the realm of anecdote. That is a big problem. Some people believe that it's a mental health problem. Some people believe it's a rural problem. Some people believe it's an ethnic problem. But nobody can say for sure why we have had such a high rate of suicide and why the persons who are killing themselves come from such a variety of backgrounds. These are not poor people. These are not depressed people. Some of these people have, steady incomes and they have, you know, good family background. But it is a baffling experience, and I don't want to jump into a program to solve the problem, and then you discover that it is not really solving the problem because we don't know what the cause is.
Journalist?
Sir, jobs. Jobs among youth in particular, there's a big concern among the youth population that they're not being afforded equal opportunity jobs under this administration, whether you're qualified or not. How do you respond to that concern?
Well, you know, the administration is 8 months. It's not as though the administration suddenly choked off employment opportunities. What we have announced and what we are promoting in the budget and in our policies is self-employment. We're not going to provide state jobs, you know, in the army, in the police force, and in government departments. What we're doing is encouraging self-employment in the form of agro-processing, marketing, manufacturing. In fact, this is the point I emphasized when I spoke at the LEN, the Linden Enterprise Network. And I think it's a model that we can use in all of the capital, all of the regional administrative centers in Lethem and Regina and Bartica, that young people should be given this sort of finance, you know, within the family and within their communities in order to establish enterprise. You may want to open an internet cafe, you might want to open some little factory for making peanut butter or for providing school snacks. You may want to buy a canter truck or acquire some sealing machine. And this is what we are going to proceed in doing, but we're not going to hand out jobs because there are no, jobs have to be created. And we like to encourage young people to approach the government for finance or for equipment in order to enable them to get jobs. And that's why so much emphasis is being placed on education. I like to get more young people going into schools, so we have more literate young people graduating from secondary schools, and we can help them to help themselves. But unless you solve the education problem, you'll never solve the employment problem. And education is a big problem for young people who drop out of school and then they find themselves at 18 or 20 years old and they can't read, write, count, or spell properly. So the two go together. You can't change that in 8 months. I hope to change it within, you know, 8 weeks or 8 years or so, but it's not going to happen overnight. Young people have to take education seriously, and I would say that this government so far is doing more than any other government to get young people to go to school and to stay in school. It's 3 Bs, it's going to become 4 Bs. Because we're going to give people breakfast, you know, we're going to extend the school feeding program, so when they get there, there's something to eat, and they will stay awake and learn their lessons. But the important thing is to get to school, and it's going to be much easier afterwards to get a job.
Speaking of the 3 Bs, the Ministry of Social Cohesion has been dubbed the Ministry of Social Bribery. You have the opposition.
That's the 4th B, the B.
You have the opposition, other persons saying that the ministry has not done much work in terms of social cohesion. You're not seeing anything manifesting from Minister Anna Ali, nor from her department. How do you respond to these concerns? What is the ministry doing?
Well, I think you must separate propaganda from fact, and you know, it sounds very, I suppose, attractive to accuse people of bribery. But in fact, the Ministry of Social Cohesion, which is one of the ministries within the Ministry of the Presidency, was the first to have an international conference on social cohesion. Of course, the product is invisible. You know, you can't measure the product in terms. You know, it's not like rice or sugar. It is the quality of relationships among people. And there have been many engagements by Minister Ali with the different religious communities and different geographical areas in order to create a more cohesive society. So I would disagree with that. And I feel that she has been moving around the country, maybe more than many other ministries or ministers, and helping to bring groups of people together. And she does a lot of work in the religious communities as well.
But sir, there's also the argument that you cannot legislate cohesiveness. You can't legislate cohesiveness in a society.
You can legislate it, but you could create the conditions under which people can meet in a non-conflictual way. When you consider what is happening in other countries, the murders and the trafficking in persons and the executions and the terrorism, I would feel that Guyana is ahead of the game in promoting and fostering good relations between Muslims, Christians, Hindus, Baha'i, and other religious groups. I do a lot of work myself in religious groups. All that is social cohesion. And when you look at the work that ministry has been doing, social cohesion, a lot of emphasis is placed on removal of inequalities. A lot of social, I would say, hostility, discrimination comes about because of inequalities in society. Once you give a child a bicycle or you give that child an opportunity to travel to school in a boat, that child is likely to keep abreast with richer children who were getting boats because their fathers were rich, their parents were rich. But a lot of her work, a lot of Minister Ali's work has been in removing inequality. So the bicycle is not a joke. Bicycles mean that children don't have to find a minibus fare. They can get on a bicycle and get to school. You get to school, you learn your lessons, and a rich child graduates, a poor child graduates. And that too will say, hey, you're not better than me simply because you're rich. I am better than you because I do well at class. I do well at class because I have a bicycle, or I have a boat, or I have a bus to get there. So the removal of inequalities is an important element in social cohesiveness.
Fareeza, you get to ask the last question.
Mr. President, could you say what's causing the delay in appointing our ambassadors?
In many cases, people have applied. We have received applications. But there is a factor in diplomacy called agrément. And when a nomination is made, the nominating country has to receive agrément. Simply translated means agreement, but in diplomacy people use a lot of French expressions. And sometimes it is imprudent to make an announcement before agreement is granted, because you may announce, this person is to be ambassador to the United States, and the United States may not grant agreement for different reasons, citizenship, or the person may have a reputation of attacking United Nations, as a student or something like that. People might have burned the American flag outside the embassy years ago. So it is imprudent to make announcements without receiving agreement from the country to which those persons are meant to be posted. But I'm aware that some discussions have been held, and it has not come before Cabinet as yet. But the delays, such as they are part of the process. For example, even though agrément has been granted to Ambassador Cheryl Miles, she has not actually presented letters of credence. So technically, she's not yet an ambassador to Caracas. Caracas is waiting, that is the way international diplomacy operates. It's not a government department. So I would say that I would very much hope that during this month of February we hear some announcements.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, journalists. That has brought us to the end of this week's Public Interest. Thank you for joining us. Do have a blessed day, Guyana.